The city had long stopped screaming. Its bones, once spires of obsidian and steel, now jutted out of the dust like the ribs of a god left to rot. Virelon Theta had been a fortress world carved into brilliance by Dravari engineers, worshippers of force and function. Now, it was little more than ash and memory. Kael Miro dragged himself through the debris using carbon-reinforced gloves that were once sleek and tactical, but now caked in grime and blood. His Air 6 chair had died 12 kilometers back, fried by a low-atmos EMP burst that also took out half a battalion of ground mechs, and for reasons only fate found amusing, left his heartbeat still ticking. Around his waist, a tattered Onyx Legion harness sagged more symbol than utility now. No rank. No war to fight. No legs. Click. The titanium bolt spun between his fingers, again the same bolt he'd carried for 2 decades, smooth, cold, alive, with the rhythm of thinking. It kept his hands busy, kept the guilt quieter. A low sound pierced the silence. Not mechanical, not wind. Breath. Kael's body tensed one palm against the fractured tile of a government plaza that now looked like a cratered moonscape. He waited, listening. There it was again, labored wet and unmistakably alive. He followed it, dragging himself past a collapsed monorail support, past rusting scaffolds and shattered propaganda displays until he found her. She was pinned under part of a statue, some long-dead Dravari military icon, its carved face now fractured into meaningless shards. Her body was twisted, shoulder bleeding, one arm braced against the crushed stone like she'd been holding it off for hours. Her skin was bioluminescent azure, the shimmer dulled by shock and blood loss. The glowing lines that marked Dravari lineage flickered dimly along her temples and neck, as if debating whether to give up. Her eyes fluttered open as he approached. She didn't speak at first, just stared at him. Not in horror, not in recognition. In confusion, a human, crippled, alone. His voice was sandpaper. "You alive under there, Doc?" Her throat worked. "I am not your concern." He blinked, then chuckled once. "Well, that's too bad, because I'm making you mine." She tried to move, and a sound came from her chest that no living thing should make. Kael's hands were already on the statue fragment. His shoulders screamed. The leverage was impossible, the angle suicidal. But the titanium bolt clicked again, once, twice, 3 times, and he pushed. The stone shifted, just enough. He yanked her free, pulling her body toward him, like hauling a sack of shattered stars. She cried out once, then bit it off with Dravari pride. "You're a strange kind of fool," she hissed. Kael grinned, only kind left. He propped her against a fallen girder, checking her vitals with a scanner fused into the lining of his gauntlet. Pulse, erratic. Tissue damage extensive. No immediate threat of neural cascade, but close. Her nameplate was still intact on the torn remains of her vest, Dr. Lyra Nathari Biostructure Division. Kael tapped it. "Scientist. Figures. You're too pretty to be infantry." She winced. "And you're too broken to be a threat." He laughed softly. Yet here we are. Above them, smoke drifted like ghosts, denied afterlife. The horizon throbbed with light, stray artillery flashes from battles still raging farther north. But here in the corpse of Virelon's capital, there was only silence, 2 enemies crumpled side by side among the bones of an empire. Kael checked the magnetic clip on his belt. 1 charge cell, 1 stim injector, 2 protein cubes, not enough for 2 people. Definitely not enough for someone with a fractured thorax and no legs. And yet, he slid his arms under her without warning. She tensed, startled, but didn't resist. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, voice barely audible. Kale didn't look at her. "Because we're both still breathing. That's reason enough for now." Her fingers curled weakly around the edge of his armor, not for defense, but for balance. He adjusted her weight on his shoulder and began the crawl again, this time heavier, this time slower, but not alone. As they moved deeper into the ruins, Lyra's breathing steadied just enough to speak again. "You'll die for this." Kale's reply was a dry whisper against cracked lips. "Maybe, but not before you live." The old maintenance tunnels beneath the Senate district groaned with the sounds of shifting metal and distant collapse. A labyrinth of forgotten conduits and sealed passages, it offered little in the way of light, but plenty of hiding places from drones still sweeping the surface for stragglers. Kael's gloves dragged against the rusted floor, the friction threatening to peel the synth skin from his palms. But he didn't stop. Lyra was heavier than she looked, not just in weight, but in heat, in the way she bled warmth across his shoulder, even as she tried to hide it. She hadn't spoken since they entered the tunnels, but he felt her eyes on him often, studying, measuring, questioning. Her kind had been bred to value power above all. In her world, strength determined social standing, mating rights, even access to education. And yet, here she was, broken breath wheezing, carried by a human who couldn't walk. "I can move," she whispered, finally, her voice a little clearer. "You're exhausting yourself." Kale didn't answer. Instead, he shifted her slightly higher against his back, her good arm slung over his shoulder. The motion caused her to exhale sharply, a sound of both pain and surrender. "I said I can move." He paused just long enough to say, "I know," and kept going. The tunnel opened into what had once been an access hub. The control panels were dead, their glow panels long drained of power. Kael eased Lyra down against the sloped wall and popped open the seal on one of his protein cubes. It rehydrated in seconds, an ugly gray mass that smelled faintly of lentils and disappointment. He held it out to her. She stared at it like it was a weapon. "This is what you eat," she muttered. He shrugged. "Gets the job done. Tastes like betrayal. But hey, survival's not a gourmet operation." She took it reluctantly, hands trembling slightly. Her fingers brushed his. Warm. Too warm. Her fever was rising. Kale reached into his belt for the stim injector and paused. "Only one." She saw his hesitation. "Use it on yourself. You're the one doing the crawling." He didn't answer, just pressed the device to her neck and activated it with a hiss. Her eyes widened color, returning to her cheeks almost instantly. Why, she asked again, this time softer. Kale didn't look at her, because dying alone in a hole is boring. A flicker passed across her face. Almost a smile. Almost. For the next several hours, they moved in shifts. Lyra tried to walk when she could, using the wall for support. Kael adjusted his crawling path to stay beside her, even when her legs gave out more than once. He didn't tease her, didn't offer sympathy, just waited silent and patient until she was ready to try again. At one point, a scout drone buzzed past the grated ceiling above them, casting slicing beams of red light through the cracks. Kael pressed Lyra against the wall. His arm braced protectively across her chest as the sensor passed over them and moved on. They stayed like that for several minutes after the drone had gone, breathing in sync, skin pressed to skin. Lyra broke the silence. "You have no reason to help me. We are enemies." Kael's head tilted slightly, a grin ghosting across his face. "Says who? Our nations, our genetics, history." He snorted. "Funny thing about history, it's written by survivors. Let's make sure we qualify first, yeah. She looked away, her eyes tracing the scar lines etched into his armor. You're not like the others. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Later, when they stopped to rest again, Kael rigged a heat sink using the remains of an old conduit and a copper wire from his gauntlet. As the metal glowed faintly, Lyra lay curled on her side, her breath steadier now, her eyes not quite closed. I used to believe humans were reckless, she said quietly. Impulsive, dangerous. Kael shifted beside her, and now she opened one eye. Now I believe you're all of those things. And also ridiculous. He laughed. It was short, dry, but real. We aim to please. Silence returned. But this time, it was easier. Lyra didn't shift away when he adjusted her position for comfort. Her hand remained resting against his chest, unconsciously or not. And when the heat sink finally dimmed, neither moved to relight it. They simply stayed close, letting their shared warmth fight the chill. There was a fragility to the moment, a strange, hesitant peace, not born from treaties or politics, but from skin and breath and the raw honesty of exhaustion. Kael closed his eyes. Lyra's voice reached him one more time. My people would never believe this. He didn't open his eyes. Neither would mine. But somewhere in the dark, their fingers found each other and didn't let go. The chamber found them, not the other way around. They weren't searching for it, not actively. But when the tunnel gave way to a yawning atrium wrapped in biosteel vines and forgotten architecture, it was as if the place had been waiting for centuries just for this convergence of flesh, metal, and accident. Kael paused at the edge of the threshold. Lyra's arm looped around his shoulders, her weight familiar now. The room was circular, vast, pulsing with a subtle lavender glow that had no clear source. Ancient symbols arced across the walls, etched in patterns that moved slightly when unobserved. At the center sat a crystalline pod, oblong, half-submerged in what looked like silver gel. Lyra inhaled sharply. A synarch vault. Kael gave her a sidelong glance. That your word for creepy glow tomb? She didn't answer immediately, instead pushing away from him to stand upright, using the wall for support. Her fingers traced the glowing lines on the nearest panel. These chambers were prototypes, she murmured. Part medbay, part cognition array. They operated on genetic resonance, two life forms syncing in order to stabilize one another. Kael cocked an eyebrow. That sounds suspiciously like dating. She turned to him, eyes narrow. It was used to bind warriors, pair-bonded for perfect battlefield coordination, like telepathic backup dancers. You're incapable of taking anything seriously. I just watched a vending machine try to eat a corpse 2 tunnels back. Kael muttered. My threshold for weird is stretched thin. But Lyra's attention wasn't on his words anymore. Her hand hovered over the chamber's control node, an orb embedded in the wall, pulsing gently like a second heart. It's still active, she whispered. If we link, it might heal me. Kael's voice dropped. What do you mean, link? She didn't look at him. It requires dual input. Biological and neural, a synchrony, a pause. He stared at her. You're saying we both go in, together? Yes, and it fuses our minds, in a way. He laughed once, dry and humorless. That seems like a bad idea. I'm a walking trauma dump with a taste for plasma weapons and bad decisions. Her gaze finally met his. And I'm a military researcher who dissected prisoners for neural mapping. Neither of us qualifies as safe. Kael opened his mouth, closed it, clicked the bolt between his fingers twice absently. What happens if one of us resists? The other dies, she said flatly. Or worse. There was no dramatic music, no time for debate. The sound of echoing movement rumbled somewhere in the distance. Drones, maybe? Or worse. Kale pulled himself closer to the pod, studied the way it shimmered at the edges like a mirage. Will it hurt? Yes. He nodded slowly. Then let's make it quick. Lyra helped him into the chamber. Their limbs tangled awkwardly as the pod accepted their weight. The interior was warmer than expected, like the inside of a sleeping animal. As they settled, the gel rose slowly, covering their legs, then torsos, then necks. Cables extended from the walls, curling toward them like metal serpents seeking a vein. "Ready?" she whispered, her voice a breath against his jaw. "No," he said. "But do it anyway." Her hand found the orb and pressed. The chamber pulsed. Agony then, not fire, not pain as most understood it, but the unmaking of barriers. Thoughts bleeding, memories untethered. Kyle felt himself dissolve into every alley he'd ever fought through, every scream he'd ever ignored, every dead comrade whose name he could no longer remember. And then Lyra, not her body, not her voice, but her childhood, cold and rigid. Her first dissection, hands trembling as she lied to herself that it was for progress. The lonely corridors of academy halls, the mocking laughter of warriors who respected only muscle. Her silent rage, her craving for meaning. He became it, and she him. His guilt wrapped her spine. Her ambition filled his lungs, and somewhere between neuron and nerve, breath, and blood, the bond sealed. When the gel drained, they emerged gasping, skin-slick eyes glowing faintly from residual resonance. Their hands found each other first, not out of romance, but anchor, orientation, reality. Kale's voice cracked. Still breathing, Lyra's eyes were unreadable. "You're in my head, and you're in mine." They stood. No stagger, no hesitation. Kale reached for the wall, and it hummed. The control panel flickered to life, responding not to touch, but intent. The vault recognized them now. Lyra turned toward him, her pupils still dilated, the glow in her veins matching the ones now faintly visible in his. "We are altered." Kale looked down at his hand, watched it flex with new precision. "Yeah." His grin was lopsided feral, "but I think I like it." The world moved differently now. Every sound was sharper. Every flicker of light more defined. When Kyle shifted his weight, he felt the resistance of gravity curve around him like a liquid membrane. Lyra's breath synced with his without effort. She walked beside him, not as a companion, but as an extension, two bodies threaded by a single rhythm. The bond wasn't just mental, it was biological. Their nervous systems had found harmony, sending echoes through shared spinal reflexes and overlapping perception. When Kale blinked, he sometimes saw through her eyes. When Lyra clenched her fists, his knuckles tingled. They moved through the ruins like a ghost unit, unannounced, invisible to sensors. When a cluster of patrolling drones scanned the old archive tower, they ducked into cover as one, their bodies pressed together in silence, their thoughts quietly interchanging with an efficiency no training could mimic. The synaptic bleed was still messy. There were moments when Kyle's emotions slid into Lyra's mind like oil on water, clashing with the cool logic of her scientific framework. There were images he hadn't meant to share, the haunted faces of civilians left behind during Onyx Legion extractions, the smell of scorched colony soil on Valarn Outpost. And she had secrets, too. Crystalline memory fragments of lab reports coded in fear diagrams of dissection protocols that had once seemed acceptable. But amid the chaos, something else had begun to take root. trust. Not built through words, built through reflexes. It happened during their first combat test. The ambush came fast. 5 biohardened scavengers, rigged with neural jammers and clawed gauntlets. They moved like animals, coordinated and cruel. Lyra saw them first. Kyle reacted before she finished her thought. He launched himself sideways, pulling her into a controlled slide across a collapsed floor panel, his left gauntlet activating with a shock pulse that shorted the first attacker's spinal mount. Lyra's arm snapped out, catching the second one with a knee to the chest, dislocating its breathing valve. No communication, no hesitation. By the time the third one lunged, Kyle had already drawn the plasma baton. He flicked the activator. It sputtered, not enough charge. Lyra's hand dropped to her side, fingers brushing the curved edge of the relic weapon, an artifact embedded in her old belt. It looked inert, but as her skin touched the hilt, the weapon roared to life with a hiss of blue-white plasma. Kale took it without question. The baton responded to his grip, not because it recognized him, but because it recognized her. Through the bond, he moved, not like a crippled man crawling through fire, not like a survivor. He moved like something reborn. The scavengers lasted 10 seconds. Their bodies hit the dust in unison, smoke trailing from cauterized armor seams. The last one tried to flee, but Kale flung the baton like a thunderbolt, pinning the attacker's synthetic spine to a wall with surgical precision. Then silence. Kale stood there, chest heaving, the scorched weapon pulsing in his hand. Lyra approached, her expression unreadable. Her fingers brushed his cheek, scouting for wounds, or perhaps for confirmation that he was still there. "You adapted," she said finally. "Adaptation is what humans do best," Kale murmured. He offered her the baton back. She hesitated. "No," she said softly. "It listens to you now." That night, they took shelter in the remains of a tram station. One side collapsed inward to reveal a sliver of starlight. Lyra traced formulas in the dirt with a shard of panel glass, but her calculations kept unraveling into nonsense, not from error, but from distraction. Kale leaned back against a cracked pillar, the titanium bolt still turning between his fingers. "Do you hear it?" he asked. Lyra paused. "Hear what?" "The quiet. It's like it's waiting." She didn't answer, but she heard it too. The hush after violence. The stillness between thoughts. It came not from absence, but from balance. 2 frequencies aligned. She looked at him, at the raw angles of his jaw, the lattice of scars across his throat and collarbone. There was a kind of poetry to it, flesh rewritten by purpose, now humming with foreign resonance. "I didn't believe in fusion," she said. He smiled. "And now," she leaned in, eyes glowing faintly, "now I wonder what else I was wrong about." Their foreheads met not in intimacy, but in alignment. A ritual of warriors in sync, not as lovers, not yet, but as a singular response to a universe that had demanded they remain apart. Above them, the stars flickered like applause. Below them, the earth pulsed with something ancient, and inside them, a new kind of weapon took shape, not forged in metal, but in mutual will. The signal was never meant to be activated. Buried deep in the fortress core of Virilone Theta, the planetary relay tower had long been dark, its command deck stripped of functionality after the orbital bombardment. But the fusion between Kyle and Lyra had rewritten the rules. What once required multi-tiered biometric access and military codes now responded to a different kind of authority, biological harmony, shared resonance. They reached the relay as morning crept over the dead capital. Dust hung in the air like mourning cloth. The tower loomed against a scarred horizon, black and jagged, like a dagger embedded in the planet's spine. At its base, rows of inactive sentries stood slouched in deactivation frames, eyes dim. Kale glanced at them. "What are the odds they wake up mid-hack?" "Non-zero," Lyra said calmly. "But we only need 3 minutes." He rolled his shoulders, the plasma baton resting against his back like an old friend. They passed into the inner vaults, unchallenged. Their fused neural frequency acted like a bypass key, disabling traps, accepting contradictions. The relay's control room was a chaos of cracked screens and exposed cabling, the kind of place where technology went to die. Lyra crossed to the interface and placed her hand against the panel. It blinked once, confused, then flickered into life. Kale moved beside her, his presence stabilizing the connection. He didn't need to do anything, just be. The system recognized their unity as authority. Together, they weren't just user and system, they were the equation. A sphere of light ignited above the console. "That's the broadcast array," Lyra whispered. "To where?" "Everywhere." She tapped the command overlay. A schematic of Dravari fleet movements unfolded, followed by human outposts, merchant routes, and disputed sectors, all rendered in brutal clarity. Then something else emerged. Alliance failure points, diplomatic deadlocks, fractured communication lines. Kale whistled low. "This thing's a war calculator. Now it's a peace weapon." They uploaded the signal, compressed, encrypted, but designed to unfold like a song in the mind. At its heart was data overlapping frequencies between human and Dravari neural structures. Weapon compatibility, matrices, genetic overlays that proved indisputably that shared evolution was not just possible, but beneficial. It was proof that their bond wasn't an anomaly. It was a prototype. Within seconds, the array pulsed once, then transmitted. The sky flickered. Far above Dravari, fleet sensors twitched. Human recon satellites glitched for a moment, then rebooted with new logs already downloaded. Across 4 systems, AI cores pinged alerts. The war paused not from orders, but from curiosity. Kale leaned against the console, watching the light dim. "What do you think will happen now?" Lyra's fingers were still resting on the terminal, her veins glowing faintly with residual charge. Fear, confusion, then recalibration, then blood, maybe, or maybe not. If even one person out there sees what we've become, it could be enough. They didn't have long to wait. 2 hours later, the horizon shimmered. Drop carriers, fast and low, both human and Dravari. Unmarked, unaffiliated, renegade units or coalition enforcers, it didn't matter. They were armed and they were coming fast. Kale rose body low to the ground baton, already active. Lyra stood beside him, her breath slow and steady. The first carrier broke through the ruins like a hammer swing. Soldiers poured out clad in hybrid armor, bearing weapons that merged alloy with bone machines with instinct. Their eyes were hungry. A commander stepped forward. Her insignia was unfamiliar. "You Kale Miro," she called out. Kale's eyes narrowed. "Depends. You come to shoot us or salute us?" The commander's lips twitched. "Neither." Lyra stepped forward. Her tone was even. "You're here for the signal." The commander nodded. "The galaxy is changing, fast, and people are scared." Kale exhaled. "So what now?" "We don't need leaders," the commander said. "We need symbols. You're it. You and her." Lyra's spine straightened, instinctively proud. Kale's voice was dry. "That sounds like a terrible idea." "Exactly," the commander smiled. "That's why it might just work." They left the tower, Shortly after, escorted, not captured. Observed, not commanded. Whispers followed them through the camp. The fused ones, the pair, who hacked the relay, the traitor and the scientist. And something else, the future. That night, as they stood under the skeletal remains of a once sacred monument, Lyra rested a hand over her abdomen without thinking. Kale noticed. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Their bond had deepened. Molecular signals exchanged quietly, cells whispering. The possibility was no longer theoretical. The connection had taken root in more than just neurons. Kale said nothing, just reached out. His hand covered hers and stayed. They vanished before dawn, not out of fear, out of necessity. Symbols were dangerous things, especially when they breathed, especially when they carried blood that could not be categorized, parsed, or genetically aligned with one flag. Kyle and Lyra left behind the escort, the relay tower, and the weight of revolution beginning to form around their existence. The galaxy would chase them in time. But first, they needed silence. They found it in the low-orbit ruins of Station Harrow. Once a Draveri research facility, now hollowed out by neglect and strung with vines of synthetic mycelium. It was here, among floating debris fields and solar wind, that they built something fragile, a future not dictated by violence or data, but choice. Kale refitted a section of the station's hydroponics bay into a living space. Lyra reclaimed abandoned gene scaffolds and rewrote them not for weapons or enhancement, but for stability. Her hands, once designed to open bodies for study, now shaped life. Their child began as a flicker in the scans. No heartbeat yet, but a pulse, a harmony. They named her Aelin, a name with no allegiance, no translation, just breath and promise. Kale would often sit by the viewport titanium bolt, spinning between his fingers, watching the stars, like he was reading a script written in motion. He didn't smile often, but when he did, it was never for show. Lyra would catch him humming sometimes, a melody with no words. And when she asked, he'd only say, "It's what calm sounds like." Aelin grew fast. Draveri neuroplasticity and human hormonal flux accelerated her cognition beyond standard models. At 6 months, she began humming back. At 7, her eyes tracked satellite debris and blinked in mathematical sequences. By 9, she drew in light, literally her fingertips bending photons into glowing spirals on the walls. They kept no comms open, no broadcasts. But the universe has ways of listening. First, it was scavenger teams. Curious, nervous. Then it was researchers' secret factions from both sides wearing false names and trembling with unspoken awe. None of them stayed long. Some left gifts, medical synth kits, alloy upgrades, raw food cubes. Some left warnings. "They're coming." Kale nodded. They always do. He trained Aelin anyway. Taught her gravity, not as a limitation, but a partner. He showed her how to catch falling objects without looking. How to breathe evenly in combat. How to use her voice not as a weapon, but as a tuning fork that could rattle machines. Lyra trained her too quietly. Taught her how to encode memory, how to speak in light, an equation, how to listen to ecosystems as if they were language. At one point, Aelin asked what war was. Kale said, "A story people forget how to stop telling." Lyra said, "An imbalance in equations." Aelin tilted her head, then said, "So fix the math." They laughed until they cried. The message came not by signal, but by presence. One morning, Aelin pointed at the glass. "They're here." A fleet, not warships, but representatives. Fractal flags, unified systems. The galaxy fractured, but watchful. Waiting. Lyra turned to Kale. They'll want you to speak. He shook his head. No, they'll want her. Aelin stood between them, 5 years old, and already a force of nature. Her fingers glowed with remembered light, her eyes steady. I'll go, she said, but only if you come too. Kale rose, took her hand. Lyra joined them. Together, they stepped onto the docking bridge as the first diplomat arrived. A tall creature with mirrored skin and a voice like symphonies collapsing. It bowed low. You are the Convergence. Kale smirked. We're a family. Aelin smiled up at the alien. Want to learn? And the galaxy finally said yes. In this emotionally charged cinematic HFY style, sci-fi epic, they mocked the slow legless human until he crushed their strongest warrior. We follow Kale Miro, a legless former enforcer of the defunct Onyx Legion, as he drags himself through the ruins of war-ravaged Virulent Theta, only to find something far more powerful than Vengeance Connection. When Kyle discovers Dr. Lyra Nathari, an injured Dravari xenobiologist pinned beneath wreckage, he saves her not out of logic or orders, but sheer humanity. What begins as survival turns into trust, then transforms into something deeper, as the two form an accidental biological bond through a long-forgotten Synarch vault. Minds merge. Bodies synchronize. Emotions bleed across boundaries that were never meant to be crossed. Together, Kyle and Lyra become a living weapon, using their fusion to defeat scavengers, hijack a planetary broadcast array, and transmit the ultimate heresy that cooperation is stronger than conquest. When Lyra becomes pregnant with their hybrid child, a girl named Aelin, the story pivots into legend. This child isn't just a symbol of interspecies peace. She's a new equation. By the end, the galaxy comes not with guns, but with curiosity. Aelin becomes the answer to a question no civilization dared ask. What if strength wasn't about war at all? If this story moved you, if you felt the ache, the sparks, the transformation, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel. Let us know in the comments, what would you sacrifice to rewrite the future? And remember, sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy is love.